Welcome to the RevOps Lab, a podcast exploring the art and science of revenue operations. To find more episodes and resources on scaling your revenue engine, visit getweflow.com/RevOps. Welcome to another episode of the RevOps Lab. But before we dive in, are you using Einstein Activity Capture and struggle to report and analyze your activity data? Or are you using Salesforce for Outlook or Gmail and miss activities as logging them is manual and time-consuming? Our company Weflow has solved those problems for hundreds of revenue teams like Plecklane, IDNow, or Coda. Weflow auto-captures emails, meetings, and contacts and permanently stores them as records in Salesforce. You are in control of building reports, automations, or whatever you need to do. You can sync past activities up to 24 months and much more. Visit getweflow.com/activity to learn more and get your 14-day free trial. Thanks, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the RevOps Lab podcast. I'm here with Janis, and our guest today is Haris Odobasic. Someone you probably know. He's been on this show in the past, actually one of our first guests. And it's great to welcome you back, Haris. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Hi, Philip. Hi, Janis. Thanks for the invite again. And looking to chat today.
Yeah, it's a great honor. You really should be thankful. Only a few selected people have ever had that honor so far. No, I'm just kidding. But for maybe for the listeners who don't know you yet, who are you? What do you do?
So I'm Haris, one of the co-founders here at Revenue Wizards, a RevOps and go-to-market consultancy in Amsterdam. And before that, I also worked as an operator in different companies. And before that, doing sales myself in companies or enterprises like Tesla and Oracle. And then I ended up in RevOps.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, and the reason why I invited you here today back on the show is because you wrote a book. There is another revenue operations book. I think that's good. I don't think there are enough books yet. And the book that you wrote is called The RevOps Pendulum, which is not an easy word to pronounce for me. But I trained hard
Nice.
long before this episode, so I hope I'm excelling at it. But I'm curious about that name. So why did you choose this name? Why did you choose this metaphor?
Yeah. So this is something we struggle a lot with, not just with the book, but also for the agency. And when talking to people, often you get a question, what is RevOps? And it's difficult to explain. And sometimes I'm so close in the matter that it's hard to see an easy way to explain it. And then since half a year, we're working with a designer in-house. And he was also tasked to design the cover of the book. And then he literally was in a shop and he saw a pendulum. And at that time, he was also reading through the book to get some ideas. And then he was like, wait a second. This pendulum is interesting. There are all of these different balls, basically, right? You maybe saw a pendulum before when you go to a doctor's office. Doctors love that stuff, or an old office, and then this pendulum that spins. And originally, it's called the Newton's pendulum. It has nothing to do with Newton. He didn't invent it, but he kind of created this principles of these motions of exchanging energy. And basically, these different balls can be, or weights, can be seen as different departments, be it sales, marketing, customer success, but it can also be seen as the different pillars of RevOps, like enablement, process, technology, and data. And a pendulum is only swinging when all the balls are aligned. So if one is higher, lower, no, they don't swing so well. So they need to be perfectly aligned. And if you think in RevOps, we want to align the different departments. We want to align the business functions to work together, and then you can create momentum, right? So the higher swing, and then it can move. And then now with AI, we have an additional ball that's giving even more momentum to the whole motion. So when I heard the first time he telling it, I was like, yes, this is it. So I cannot take the credit for it. Benedict, our designer, he takes definitely full credit for it.
Okay, perfect. I love it. Yeah, it's basically like the pendulum, right? So you take like one of those weights up, and then you create potential energy. You let it drop, the gravity pulls it down. Then, as soon as hits another ball, it brings that like weight into motion, turns into a kinetic energy, and then a potential energy again. So I think it's a great metaphor. When you started explaining how you came up with the name of the book, and you mentioned like it was a bit random, and the guy just saw like a pendulum swinging, I was fearing for a moment that there is no underlying. So
No. Like he
I
had the context of the book, but really, really just bringing it so simply, right? I think that's why that's why the profession there of designers is there. They see things with different eyes, some simplicity that we as professional operators might not come up on our own there.
perfect.
And
Great.
what I also like about it, it has the scientific approach. And also with RevOps, we are trying to measure things. We're trying to have a scientific approach to it, right? So not just on gut feeling on data. So that's like the other good piece that fits quite well.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay, great. So how did you write the book? I mean, sort of like what was your, intention with it? How did you approach the whole topic of writing a book? I've never written a book in my life. I think the most I've written, was my master thesis, which was around 80 pages or so. And that was a big struggle. So, I think your book has more than 400 pages. What was the underlying framework? What was the intention here?
Yeah, I think, I always love reading and always wanted to write. And definitely want to write a book. I thought the first book is going to be fiction, but hey, it is non-fiction, and it made sense because I work in the field of revenue operations. I built experience in that field, so. And I was, while reading through the RevOps books, I was like, okay, there's a need in the market. While writing afterwards, at some point, Sean, he also published his book. I was like, all right, cool, even more motivation to improve my book, maybe. And yeah, the writing process, I read also many biographies of different writers and how they approach writing. And I think for me, Stephen King was a good inspiration because Stephen King is also very disciplined. He has, Stephen King is publishing a book every 10 months or so, like all his crime novels. Like he has over 50 book, and how it worked is really disciplined. That he has like a writing slot every morning between 2 to 3 hours, and then he sits down and writes. And I did something similar. He would wake up in the morning, 6, 7, and had the coffee, and then sat down and started writing. In the beginning, I was just started writing one chapter maybe about, okay, I know systems. We need to talk about systems. All right, let's start writing about systems. Then I know what, okay, there needs to be some form of enablement in it. Okay, let's start writing about enablement. So really like pieces and pieces without having a clear end or beginning, which is also when you read a lot about the writing process, it's just, okay, start in the middle, end in the beginning. That's usually the last part to worry about. And so I know it's going to require a lot of discipline. I thought, okay, because I work in the field, it maybe going to take me 5 months and then I'm going to be done. I know it took 20 months, and fully underestimated the work. And yeah, it's definitely also not something you do on your own. There were many people involved, many reviewers, like you two as well, for example. And I could not have done it without an editor, right? So you need an editor there. Yeah, a lot of work and effort, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, congratulations on, publishing the book. It's awesome. I think this work comes all on top of the typical work you already do, right? So but I'm curious, like, what were some insight that surprised you the most when writing the book? Yeah.
Mm, I think you mean in terms of content, or you mean in terms of from my own experience of writing?
In terms of content.
Okay, or in terms of content. Okay, great. So what we also did for the book, we did like 4 researchers, because often you find like, or search on the internet to RevOps stats, and then you get some numbers, you improve productivity by 70%, and then I dig in deeper, because if I want to publish a book, I need to have credible sources, and then I dig deeper and then see, okay, this is based on a blog post that somebody wrote without any credible source. Okay, I cannot use this number, but it seems like kind of made up. So, so I had to dig in, create own research. So we did 4 researchers. Basically, one is the analysis of LinkedIn data about the state of RevOps, how many people are there distributed globally, where they're coming from. Then we did a survey with RevOps professional, over 180 responded worldwide, asking about different themes on the book that I wrote, and I put in basically my own subjective experience, and then I basically wanted to get additional data to support it. And then the other researchers is similarly then this for VC and private equity companies, and lastly we look at stock performance of listed companies and how it impacts those that have RevOps compared to non-RevOps based on S&P 500 companies. So based in these research, I found some surprising facts. And for example, we talk a lot about AI. And if you believe on LinkedIn, AI is already everywhere and well established. Well, the reality it's not there yet, and also that many people, there's also some worry about AI that we always it's going to augment people, but also if you augment people, it means you need less people. So that was definitely, and when also looking in the VC and private equity research, it was very interesting that the PEs understood it way more better than VCs. VCs had the good understanding, but PEs were like, okay, we really need these efficiencies. I think it also has to do with because private equities want to quickly sell it. They're not looking that much into longer 3 to 5 years exit windows. And so they push a lot on the RevOps agenda. And one thing as well, what I found surprising, that there wasn't that much focus on communication always. I dedicated a whole chapter about communication because especially the larger the company gets, the more stakeholders you have to work with. And if you don't kind of master your communication skills, then projects are stalling or they reach a dead end. Yeah, so that's where a few of the surprising stuff.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think on the PE versus VC side, and we work with a lot of PE-backed companies, and the reporting requirements and the level of detail on the board level is certainly quite sophisticated, I'd say, especially with regards to go-to-market. And I think it's interesting because in my mind, it's actually something that is very, very positive for companies. If you really deeply understand the system you're creating and you're tracking what actually is happening in a sophisticated manner, and I feel like that's something where the VC-backed companies could definitely learn from. Just looking at the reporting requirements. And I think that then trickled through the operating cadence you typically run. Yeah, and then I think on the AI side, I mean, I think that's super interesting. We recorded a episode with Christina Di Martini yesterday, the VP from Forrester, who does a lot of research, and she shared some interesting views on AI. We'll release this episode also soon. Quite interesting, and I think she was proposing a notion of like customer journey first, right? Like, and then you basically try to figure out what are the problems you're actually solving, which problems should you solve, and then what are the tools to solve these problems. And AI is one of those tools and can basically help you solve these problems. But she very much explicitly said, don't have an AI first strategy, meaning you just do AI for the sake of AI, but really center around the customer journey and the actual problems that are worth solving for, that are essentially tied back to the core metrics, the go-to-market metrics and your annual plan. So I think that was very much in line with what you just said. Maybe to go through the book, I mean, like we won't go through the whole book, but give the listeners an idea. What are different chapters? What topics did you go into? and why these pillars. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I think kind of has three parts. And the first part is really to setting the stage of what is RevOps, where it's coming from, how is it currently distributed globally, right? So like 80,000 professions, where are they based? And then really defining RevOps, because still there are many different forms of definition, and they have borrowed a lot from the work of Tariq Hassan, who made a PhD on the topic, what is RevOps? So very fitting. And from him, I also took like the definition and put it in the book. And also in his definition, like, or also background there, he also did a lot of research, a lot of interviews with senior RevOps professionals. And based on that input of all these kind of different opinions, he formed like the common ground of what is kind of RevOps. And in there's also like the four pillars that he mentioned, which is process, enablement, data and insight, and systems. And hence, the second part of the book is really looking into one of those pillars. I think the reality is companies might call it differently, but in a way, they all do something like that. But they might just call it differently internally, and it's completely fine, right? And also how to get started with RevOps, right? If you are a SaaS that has 50 employees, your journey to RevOps will look very different or compared to an enterprise with 5,000 employees worldwide, right? So also looking at those nuances. And then the final end, or the final equilibrium, is about the rolling them from RevOps to finance. I see a lot now RevOps really reporting into a finance function. And then finally, the special link of AI. Really, while writing the pro book, I noticed the whole AI topic is really emerging, and it's a massive change to go to market. So I rewrote some chapters to make it more fitting to AI, and then eventually added over a whole chapter about AI. And then some concluding remarks about how to be a better RevOps professional and a little bit of future outlook.
Yeah. I think like, I mean, like the way you describe it, and also like the way that when you send us like a copy for a bit of basically giving feedback and some proofreading, is this is really a book that is more like a general book, an introduction into the topic of revenue operations, like a manual, a guideline. Hey, here are some frameworks that you can utilize, and this is like a good concept to think about it. And what I especially liked is sort of like the first part of the book is about like setting the pendulum in swing, and you actually start with team structure and strategy, and the communication piece, right? Like stakeholder management. And I think this resonated super well with me, because I think this is exactly what a lot of people, I think, are getting wrong when they start with revenue operations. It's like very quickly into thinking about systems, very quickly thinking about like the general sales, like details of the sales process that quickly need to be improved and so on. While if you really want to, do like a proper execution of revenue operations, then the first step should be to actually take a step back and understand, sort of like what Janis said right just before, with like our conversation with Forrester, with is first map like what is your actually the user journey. What's the user journey? What's their buying journey? How is it actually? What is their preferred journey? How is your current journey? Where are the gaps? How can you bring it closer together? What is like the goal that you have this year, like the big company goal, or for this quarter, right? Like, and again, where are the gaps, and so on. So, and I think this is always like such an important starting point, such a fundamental thing to get right, because if you can't get that right, like basically mapping out the strategy, building a team around it, and then doing proper stakeholder management in order to be basically in a position within the company to actually execute without getting like looped into too many things that have nothing to do with like the actual goal of the plan. Then you're setting yourself up for failure. And then those four pillars: enablement, process, systems, and data insights, you won't really make any progress there, right? So That's sort of like, how I read the book. It's basically like a book for, it's a book for beginners. It's a book for people who just, want to get inspired, who have experience, but just want to get inspired by reading an article. Is that like a fair summary on top of your mind?
Yeah, I think it's also to having everything in one place, because there's a lot of content about RevOps. You have your podcast, creating also even more great content. But the great thing with a book is you have everything. You have a reference manual. You have it there. You can read it. You can let it sink in. It can maybe let you think further. Every chapter. I'm a big fan of Socrates. And so every chapter asks with some Socrates reflections, how I call them. So asking just question, just so that you stop down and think, okay, like, how we do that in our business? Yeah, if I consider this, and let's just do a little bit, make people think as well. And yeah, I think it sets the base, the foundations. So for people starting out in RevOps, want to build a career there, but also for leaders who want to understand better what RevOps and might implement it in the companies. Because often when we join companies, like you mentioned before, they want to jump into execution mode, but often the chief marketing officer, the chief revenue officer, and CFO, CEO, they all have maybe a different definition of RevOps. And so they have different expectations to it. And these expectations needs to be met, but they also need to find like a middle ground. So I think that might also help to find this level of middle ground, this shared understanding, because very often there is no shared understanding.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. Like, what are some, stories? I mean, you talk to a lot of people, right? You shared this with a lot of people. Like, what are some stories, or what is like, one story that comes to mind that you think is worth sharing to maybe tease your book a little bit to our listeners?
Yeah, I think like you maybe know. I think did you had Evelina from Adin on the podcast? The VP of RevOps.
We know her, yeah, yeah.
All right,
I
get you
think
on the
not yet,
podcast.
but we should probably get her on the podcast. That's a great
Exactly,
point. Yeah.
exactly. Like, yeah, we had also a call this morning. Like, we also having a book launch party in the 22nd of May, and she's also doing a fireside chat there with the team there. And so yeah, and they also had like, because they are Adina, it's like a few thousand employees, and the RevOps team is 55 people. So if you don't like, we don't want to talk about the pillars like that we just exactly mentioned. You need to get really the strategy straight. Like, how are the teams going? Just what are they gonna do, right? So they also have something nice. They call it like road to AI. It's like, because like you mentioned, it's not AI that we just do it. It's like it's a path. It's a journey to get there. And also like in terms of the whole project management techniques, the prioritization, because if you can imagine you have a company with a few thousand employees, there are many different stakeholders and they all want something from RevOps, and they need to be efficiently managed, and like how they're applying, for example, the Eisenhower presentation metrics, how they're building out the roadmap. I think that finally fits well with the concept introduced into the book and then also applied into the practice. That example of a larger enterprise, but the same can be applied to obviously a startup and scale up. So that was a good story.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's such a recurring theme that before you act, you need to listen, learn, understand, and then prioritize. And for some reason, like somehow, like make sure that your core stakeholders understand this, like these trade-offs, right? Because I think the reality is that very often um you're basically in an organization where, as soon as their next board meeting is around the corner, you just let everything slide and you just have to jump on it. And obviously that completely destroys your workflow, and it obviously depends on the size of the organization, but really tying it back to the customer journey, tying it back to your core goals for the year, and prioritizing the things that actually have an impact is so crucial. And I think the challenge there in my mind is it's actually sometimes really hard to know what has an impact, right? Like I think this comes up again and again, also a recurring theme that like it's just really hard to know what has the biggest impact on a project level, and there's no easy answer, I guess.
Yeah, I think it comes back to a more almost enterprise topic, but I think scale-ups can learn from it and start up strategic planning, right? So if there's no plan, you're like a chicken running without a head and like don't know where to go. And it's where your roadmap comes into place, your OKRs or whatever objectives you're using there to have a strategy, have key objectives, and how are then the different RevOps projects falling into that, and which also helps them with prioritization. We talk about that in the book as well, linking your projects, your two OKRs, how they're impacting them, and even that helps then also managing stakeholders. Hey, we cannot do this right now because we're working on this goal right now, and this takes our resources away. If we neglect that, we're gonna miss that, and we know this is gonna contribute with 25% to revenue, etc. So trying also to quantify it, because often RevOps it's hard to have a KPI, right? Because we are a support function that supports other teams in reaching their KPIs more instead of owning how many sales calls we are doing. Like I don't think that's possible.
Yeah,
Certainly, certainly,
I mean,
certainly hard.
I
Certainly
assume you
hard
can
to
buy the
do.
book on Amazon, but is there a
Yeah, I
preferred?
think lots of. Sorry, go ahead.
I assume you can buy the book on Amazon, but is there a preferred vendor of choice to buy the book? Where can people find the book? Is there a
Yeah,
website or something? Yeah.
there is on our own website, Revenue Wizard /RevOps book. There is the link where to order it, which just links you just to Amazon, a little teaser of the book, and then like a resource hub, because we have some templates, etc. that people can access. That's also there, and then it's mainly available on Amazon, and I think in a few weeks within Amazon, it might be then published to other retailers, but only for the US and for the UK. Every other market just on Amazon.
Perfect. And where's the launch party?
The launch party, 22nd of May in Amsterdam. And it's going to be fun. I think we have 60 signups already, aiming at around 100. And yeah, it's going to be an evening of a little bit of business, a little bit calls, conversations, the trends, and then just more a little bit of celebration more, and drinks, snacks. There's going to be an artist giving a little exposition, DJs, having just fun, and yeah, lots of networking.
Celebrating RevOps. That sounds great.
Exactly,
Love
exactly.
that.
Perfect. Haris, yeah, I think our question, what book would you recommend, doesn't matter today. I think we recommend your book. Go get it and read it. So yeah, I think it's a great new addition to the ever-growing library of useful publications on the topic of revenue operations. Haris, thank you so much for joining this episode. It's always good talking to you. And yeah, welcome back soon, I'm sure.
Thank you, Janis. Thank you, Philip. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the RevOps Lab podcast. Please consider to like and subscribe our show and give us a 5-star rating on wherever you're listening. If you have feedback or suggestions, let us know at podcast@getweflow.com. We read and reply to every email. Thank you.